I'll just basically try to take you through some of the work we've done together with our colleagues from CEE Bankwatch, with EUKI, in the past year, and try and put that into the sort of the current political context that we have in Europe, and see where the CEE region sits in all of this. So it's really about situating the progress in the region in that broader context. And I think a couple of sort of general reflection maybe to start off with is that there's a very sort of direct line to draw from the European Green Deal as von der Leyen introduced it when she took office 5 years ago, to this global energy consensus that we achieved last year in Dubai. And when you say energy transition on the top of the agenda, doesn't of course mean that nothing happened before that. I mean, a lot of policies were put in place already since 2008, already had a very big impact, taking the energy transition forward. But I think it is really important to underline that when von der Leyen took office, it was really the first time the European Green Deal was, and the whole energy transition really came top of the EU agenda for the first time in basically the EU history. So there was a real step up. And that meant that when COVID hit and then Russia's war hit, the EU responded very differently than it did in 2014, for example, when the first invasion of Ukraine took place, when it still looked to diversify its gas supply entirely. This time round, it was able to respond by a big acceleration of the energy transition, and it was across the board. It was everywhere, including in the CE region. And I think it also really helped to give the EU sufficient credibility and confidence to then be one of the driving forces politically ahead of COP last year to push for this tripling renewable, doubling efficiency, and phasing out of fossil fuels at COP28. So to sort of kick off with some of the main findings that we've sort of come to with our work, I think it overall started with let's call it the 100 billion deal to deliver a 55% emission cut by 2030. And it was very much like that on the table when von der Leyen took office. She promised a cut of 55% of emissions by 2030 to the European Parliament, but had to get the support of member state leaders unanimously. So she came out with this approach of putting $100 billion, thinking US, 100 billion euro mechanism on the table. The exact numbers were a little different when inspected more closely, but that was sort of the number she went out with at the time, to deliver these emission cuts. And I think the bottom line that we found, it was really this combination of regulatory market-based instruments like support schemes for renewables, efficiency standards, carbon pricing, but also financial and other support schemes, and particularly the Just Transition Fund that really helped leaders from the CE region to step up and really make significant progress. So that's really been the key innovation, the key thing that happened and did look good. And we've sort of got a few examples here in the slide, but we'll come to speak to some of these later on, so I won't dwell on them here. So if you look at tripling renewables, and this is just looking between 2019 when Commission took office and 23, the last year we have with data available from colleagues in Amber. You see very significant progress across the boards when it comes to the share of renewables in power generation. Whether that's enough to triple renewables by 2030, that is another matter. But again, important progress has been made here. Same when you look at transitioning away from fossil fuels, and the key point around the whole UAE consensus is that we need to do both. We need to phase out renewables and transition away from fossil fuels. Again, it is very much going together here. And you see, again, significant drops in the share of fossil fuels in power generation, even if it's starting from a very high point in some cases like Poland's. I think it's really worthwhile to look particularly at coal phase-out progress. I mean, the CE region was always the energy mix in a lot of these countries was very much dominated by coal. But if you look basically at what's been going on, they took a slightly different approach from Germany, and much more quietly, but very steadily, most CE countries are actually looking at a coal phase-out trajectory that is not too far off from this critical benchmark that OECD countries need to meet in 1.5 degree scenario, so 2030. Not 2030 straight, but pretty far off, and there's not that much coal left in the power mix. And just worth looking at a number of these countries. I mean, Bulgaria at the moment formally still has a 2038 coal phase-out date. But if you look again at all the spending programs that they've put in place to spend EU funds, recovery, just transition, there isn't actually a lot of coal going to be left on their power mix already by 2030. I think it's about 1 gigawatt. Czechia looking to be coal-free by 2033. Hungary 25, Estonia, Latvia were already coal-free. I'll let Michael touch on Poland later. It's a complicated story. Romania has a coal phase-out date of 2032, but if you look at the latest version of its 10-year network development plans, seems they're actually planning to be coal-free earlier than that, as early as 27 potentially. But again, keen to also hear colleagues George's perspective on that one. And Slovakia set a coal phase-out date in 2030. For 2030 in 2019 and actually went coal-free earlier this year. So basically it's been across the board a very steady progress in moving away from coal. Efficiency, it's possibly the most important but also the most difficult one. I think the EU, what's important to point out here, the EU really considers the revised EED as the instrument that is delivering on the UAE pledge of doubling efficiency by 2030. As a whole, there's a legal commitment to reduce consumption with 11.7% at 2030. But there's a very big but, of course, and that is that in speed tracker that colleagues from CAN Europe have developed shows that national contributions, including in CE countries, are really not good enough. There are some really major holes in there. But there are also opportunities like the requirements for sustainable heating plans that municipalities with more than 40,000 inhabitants have, provide some opportunity to reduce that delivery risk. So that's a bit of a snapshot on where we are at the moment. I just wanted to sort of finish off with a few reflections on where we are now, where we go next. I think there's been a lot of talk about, a backlash. Are we sort of toning down the Green Deal? Is it a course? I think the really key point to make here again is that this new agenda is different from the previous one, but it's a logical next step to what we had before. We have achieved an agreement in the EU to have about 70% renewables in the power mix by 2030. We've reformed our power market with new support schemes for renewables, for non-thermal flexibility options. So it is very obvious that if you want to deliver on all of this, you need to think about how you decarbonize your industry through decarbonized power. You need to think about where you're going to build all the machines, the grid material, the generation capacity, the batteries, the whole thing, the whole supply chain. Needs to be there. So this more industry focus is not necessarily, can be, but it's not necessarily a step back from this climate ambition. And the other thing to really point to is that despite all the polarization and the pushback from a lot of reactionary forces and sometimes governments, sometimes parties, is that there's a pretty strong consensus among all the democratic parties, from the Greens to the EPP, that the fossil to renewable transition has priority and needs to continue. That in itself is not controversial. The controversy is sometimes over the instruments, over some of the non-climate related, but that is pretty clear. And if you look at the team composition and the mission letters, there is a clear priority. Two big climate champions in Europe, Teresa Ribera and Dan Jurgensen, have been given a very strong mandate, a strong portfolio. Ribera has not just been put in charge of energy transition, but also competition policy. So, some very important economic instruments that she's able to leverage here. And there's a very interesting question now, and curious about what's going to happen. But of course, it is not inconceivable that whereas last time round the Commission came out with a big push on, the 100 billion deal to deliver a 55% cut by 2030, that was very much focused on just transition, that we're now going to have a clean industrial push that, again, may come with financial instruments like a new competitiveness fund to deliver 90% emission cut by 2040. Again, to try and sort of gather this political support of governments, leaders for that goal, which then, of course, allows the EU to agree to it and to propose its NDC, which needs to be derived from that 2040 ambition. Of course, really important opportunity for the EU to, again, show the progress it has been making in growing renewables, efficiency, phasing out fossil fuels, and tell the rest of the world about that progress. And I think a final point is that the new budget negotiations, but also just the hearings that have been taking place right now, are really the first moment where some of these things will be put to the test. I think the role of the Just Transition Fund is going to be really key. It's very interesting to note that if you look at the guidelines of the Commission, von der Leyen speaks about a strengthening of the Just Transition Fund. If you look at the answers that the written answers of the commissioners have given to the questions for the hearings this week and next week, they're leaving it a little bit more open. We need to look at the future of this fund. So I think what that tells us is that the future of these instruments, and this basic mechanism that we found has been successful, which is combining financial support with climate ambition. It's not secure yet. So I think there's a real, people feel this is something that has traction, has need, then now is the moment to sort of make yourself heard around that. And similarly about, things like the role of regional authorities, are they going to be still given a central role or even a stronger role in the implementation of these funds? So a lot of things still to play for, but yeah, so this is what I wanted to leave you with. Yeah, I'm done here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and back to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this comprehensive overview. Before we dive into the discussion, are there any questions of understanding that you would like to ask Peter? You have also the time afterwards when we have a bigger time slot for the Q&A session, but sometimes questions of understanding are better to clarify right away. I don't see any hands yet, but maybe you can see this as a warm-up, that you feel encouraged to ask questions then at the end. Thank you again, Peter. So as I said, we are lucky to be joined by 4 speakers who are based in 4 different European countries, or have different regional perspectives and work on quite different areas. To start, I'd like to give each of them the chance to share how their initiatives, collaborations, and national policies contribute to the effective implementation of the European Green Deal. And Binu, I would like to start with you, since your organization is a good example of putting climate policy ambition into practice. The Powering Past Coal Alliance has played a key role in facilitating coal phase-out globally, with the growing impact in Central and Eastern Europe. And could you give us some context of the PPCA's work and its role in CEE's transition? And maybe you can share a few examples of where you've seen effective collaborations that have spurred tangible results in the region.
Sure. Thanks also for having me here. I'll try to do my best to highlight that. And thank you for the great introduction to the PPCA. Maybe just building on what Elsa mentioned, we do have 180 members at the Powering Past Coal Alliance. and that includes almost a third of the world's governments. And we also have subnational governments as members, and some of them are in the most coal-dependent regions in the world. We have leading utilities as members. We also have private finance members with over $17 trillion under management. And what brings us all together is our efforts to advance a 1.5-degree aligned transition from unabated coal to clean power. And that means 2030 coal phase out for OECD countries and 2040 for non-OECD. And to your question, Elsa, on how the kind of engagements and collaboration we're seeing in Central Eastern Europe, there's a few different ways we've been engaging in the region that I wanted to highlight. Primarily, PPCA is a diplomacy vehicle. And so our co-chairs that you mentioned, the governments of UK and Canada, they do diplomatic outreach through their embassies, and they support members such as France and Germany in government-to-government engagement. And we do this in tandem with all the in-country efforts that are being done by many, I think, organizations on this call as well that are pushing for ambition. And the tangible results from this outreach is that all but 3 of the Central Eastern European countries are already members of PPCA. That means they're committed to advancing this 1.5-degree aligned coal phase out. And the only remaining ones are Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland. And we're going to be looking to engage with these governments in this year and the next. And we're also working with partners and members to support sharing of best practices and practical solutions. So there's the diplomatic outreach to raise ambition, but we also understand we need to work on practical solutions. As the PPCA, I was in the room when we launched at COP, as you mentioned, and I remember most of the members that joined us when we launched it, they had either already a significant plan to phase out coal, so they knew they were going to do it, or they had no coal in their mix. So we had so many island nations join too. But what we've seen over the last couple of years, particularly with the likes of the US, Kosovo, and Morocco joining, is we are seeing more and more countries that actually have significant coal in the mix. And I think this is where we start relating to the CEE countries, which are obviously some of the most coal-dependent countries in the EU. In fact, Poland, Czechia, and Bulgaria are the top 3 EU countries with the most coal in their generation mix. So, across PPCA membership and in our engagement with CEE as well, we're trying to spread more awareness on the best practices that are already happening. And we're seeing a lot of progress, particularly at the subnational level or regional level in CEE. We've been able to highlight particularly case studies from Eastern Wielkopolska, Upper Nitra, and we've shared that with PPCA membership and including with regions across the world. And many subnationals have actually come back to us to say, oh, those are really helpful experiences for them to learn from. And practically, we've also been able to work with partners like Climate Strategies that are supporting European Commission's initiative for coal regions in transition. So that also came out of, I think, some of the Green Deal efforts. And that's also an excellent platform for sharing these experiences. Another thing we've also done is with the UK Embassy, they organized a tour very recently of Polish coal-dependent regions in South Wales, focusing particularly on just transition efforts in the region. And that helped us as PPCA also learn more about the needs of subnationals. They're obviously interested in meeting with more regional counterparts. And also they expressed the interest in visiting regions that had more post-industrial revival. So instead of just museums. So we also see a lot of case studies where a just transition happens, more from the cultural perspective, but they also wanted to see industrial strategy. This kind of speaks to what Peter was also saying about this clean industrial package. So there's definitely interest in that. And then the practical, again, results of this kind of engagement, again, with domestic efforts from other organizations, are already starting to bear fruit. And we've seen actually 4 regions and cities in Poland that are now members of the PPCA. And we now have good working relationships with other key coal-dependent regions also, and are looking to bring them into the alliance. And from our experience working with them, it is clear that these subnationals are actually very keen to play a leadership role within their domestic context, but as well as internationally. They want to share practical solutions. They want to establish partnerships with other regions. And we want to continue to build on this interest and momentum in the region with similar actions in the coming year. maybe I'll wrap it up for now there.
Thank you very much, Binu, for the first spotlights on what is PPCA actually doing and how, or you're also saying your work becomes even more successful when you are joined by more countries or regions which are more heavily dependent on coal, which maybe brings me to Mikhail. Since we are already talking about transitioning away from coal, I would like to move over to Poland. Mikhail, Poland's energy sector has historically relied heavily on coal. We heard this. There have been, however, quite some political changes in Poland in the last years, and just recently the government has released its draft of the new National Energy and Climate Plan, NECP, for public consultation. What changes do you see that indicate a shift in Poland's approach to renewable energy?
Thank you very much for the question. We are now in the middle of the consultation process. As Instrat, Warsaw-based think tank, we are very much engaged in the process. We share our insights with civil society stakeholders. And yeah, this is the first time that the government, Polish government, really presented a scenario for the transition that can be assessed as an ambitious one, as the one that is in line with the EU ambitions. And of course, when you look at the data on the energy system, actually the changes are ongoing. Despite bad regulatory constraints, we are at 10 gigawatts of onshore wind power. We are at 20 gigawatts of solar power, which is quite a lot and quite a success story. And we are also making steps towards having 6 gigawatts in offshore wind power. So despite very hostile narratives around the transition that we have seen in Poland, in fact, the policies were more pragmatic and more mixed, and the reality on the ground, partially driven by private sector, was also better. So the changes are going, and we hope they will become better in the future. And when we see at this strategy, we see that in ambitious scenario, the with additional measures scenario that was first published just a couple of weeks ago, so quite a delay. But now we see that the government is saying that we can have much more than 50% of renewables in the power system by 2030, that our emissions can fall by a bit more than 50% till 2030 when you compare to 1990. And there is also a pathway towards having a near clean power system by 2040, so less than 10% from coal and gas. And that is not probably still very great for other countries, but in Poland, this is quite ambitious because you have to consider not just the coal legacy, but also the challenges like long winter, very seasonal output from renewables, very little hydropower, no legacy nuclear power, like all those things make it especially harder to transform in Poland. And I think as a case of an example, like in Instrat, we are doing our own power system modeling that we used to engage with previous and the current plans by the administrations. So we have the model that is a benchmark, you can say, to the government model. We can just run our own analytics, especially on the power system and the parts of the economy that are being electrified, and really challenge the assumptions, the numbers, the targets in the document. So I think this can play a very big role previously when we were building the support for the more ambitious scenarios, and now when we can engage with the plans that have those more ambitious scenarios inside. And of course, we are not fully satisfied with this new document. We are afraid that 2030 target for emission reduction relies too heavy on land use projections. For 2040, we are convinced that it's absolutely too optimistic about possible addition rate of nuclear power. So we think that even if we are going there, we won't be able to do that as quickly as this document envisions. So that would, of course, slower the transition. And of course, on the other parts, which are good, like 90 gigawatts in onshore wind target for 2030, we identify like a lot of new challenges. And this is not just the regulatory framework about distancing, but also the permitting process and the financial framework. I think when we talk about the CEE, especially, we have to consider the long impacts of the energy crisis and COVID. So higher investment costs, higher costs of financing, and also like lower projections for the expansion of demand. And that all affects the pipeline of the project, and this will be the challenging in Poland. But the thing about next steps and going forward and about also our role, now there is a consensus that more renewables are the way to go, also as Peter said in the introductory speech. But now I think we have to think not just about power system with some renewables added, but instead think about renewable-based power system. And that answers a lot of new questions about, and also like hard questions for the Green Coalition, because we have to think about winter peak demand, we have to think about flexibility, about the grid, about ancillary services. So a lot of things that were used previously by the conservative side to say, oh, this renewable-based is not possible, but it is not that the challenges aren't there. We have to identify them. We have to identify the low carbon ways to solve those issues gradually, step by step. And this is also which we are including in our modeling and in our reports. So we are now looking also at those most challenges aspects, challenges for the renewable-based transition, and looking for the ways to solve them with demand response, with flexibility, with storage, also with some peak generation. So this is the moment when the civil society has to be like very responsible, because our voice is really being heard, but also like to not allow those, for example, concerns about reliability of the power system to be used like instrumentally to slow down the transition. Instead, and our analytics also shows that going forward with renewables and clean technologies is the way to go, even if you keep the power stations for quite a lot of years more, because Poland won't be able to unfortunately cut entirely reliance on coal and gas power plants, but we can very quickly cut reliance on actually burning coal and gas, and we can achieve substantial lowering of emissions and substantial also gains for our energy security in quite a short time. And yeah, I'm seeing also some legislative actions on the part which we are also active around. So I'm hopeful for the next years, and a lot of work is happening right now in Poland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. I saw Bino smiling and nodding a lot of times. Would you like to come in quickly, or?
No, sorry, just from working on policies here in Canada, also I just can relate to some of the issues you were talking about, particularly with winter peaking and yeah, like the challenges you face once this is a reality. The talking points of the opponents then become real challenges, not at the scale that they're talking about. Yeah, so all of that resonates. And maybe one observation I wanted to add to what you were saying, Mikhail, a lot of the challenges of this renewable-based power system can also be addressed by expanding transmission interconnections. And I know there are some efforts happening in Europe for that. I don't know if you had any thoughts to add on that from the Polish perspective and how that conversation is going.
Very short about that. I think this is like a strategic issue on the European level, because despite the interconnection of our systems, especially Poland is also trying to prepare for the future when those connections are not entirely to be dependent upon. Yes, so you have to balance between like national energy security and the gains and like advantages that come with EU integration. And yeah, we are one of our complaints and one of our inputs on the consultation is that even if we think about this national security, we also have to fully use the potential that comes from the continental grids, which is an enormous asset and can to significant degree address the gaps and challenges that we would encounter if you would try to decarbonize the grid basing like as an energy island. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mikhail, and also Binu, for your quick reaction. Teresa, we have now talked quite a bit about the role of national CEE governments like Poland in the energy transition. And we are very grateful for having you as a kind of national policy representative representing the Czech Ministry of Industry and Trade. The Czech Republic has been implementing EU policy through national initiatives like the Green Savings Program, which has had notable impact on households' transitions to renewable energy. Could you outline how this program has addressed the specific needs of Czech households and its role in your country's Green Deal strategy?
Yes, thank you, Elsa, very much. Just a small correction. I would like to point, I'm not from the Ministry of Industry and Trade. I'm from the State Environmental Fund, which is subordinated to the Ministry of Environment. Just to be clear, to inform the others. And we are the major state institution that is covering the environment policy in the Czech Republic. And the difference with the ministry is that we are oriented strictly on our national partners, regional partners, and there is, I would like to say, no international cooperation for the fund. This is the role of the ministry in the Czech Republic. So the international cooperation is covered by the Ministry of Environment. We are now supporting, or our role is to support the implementation of the transition policy since 1992. So it's a long way behind us already. And we started with our biggest or big industrial equipments, and then we moved slowly to the small parts of this field, which are households and residential buildings. We started along the year 2005 with the preparation of the policy, and since 2009 we are supporting particular households and residential buildings, the owners or the builders, to improve their buildings or to build up a new absolutely zero energy consumption buildings and houses. The program has changed very much since the modernization fund has been implemented in our budget as well. So now, for the last 2 years, we have divided our program and spread it into a wider population. Now, very specific thing we do have, I would like to say, is a special focus on low-income households, which is quite a big problem for the Czech Republic because we have many households with retired people, many households with disabled or low-income families. This is a specific for the Czech Republic, differ to other countries or abroad, because the government in Czech Republic does not support all families, all young families, just really the poorest one. So this is our target group we are now focusing on, and it's I would like to say it's very no, I didn't get the word. Sorry. So the program is now working for, or it's going for 2 years, and it's very favorite. And now on September we have widened it even for the replacement of the heating systems and the replacement of the heat sources for these households, which helps us very much because we do have still very much solid fuel boilers within the people. And that's what we are now focusing on, and we are in just for 2 months. But I would like to say that we already have or register over 10,000 applies for in this measure, which is we didn't expect such a big interest in this. So just very, very quick view of our work.
Impressive. Congratulations on that. I saw many faces were like, okay, that's a lot. I'm also curious to hear more from your example later. Teresa, thank you for now. Finally, I would like to move over to, let's say, the actual technical implementation of the European energy targets. And George, you now know the region's, particularly Romania's, energy transmission system very well. Romania plays an important role in increasing the share of renewables in Europe's power consumption, not least by way of the national grid and its importance for neighboring countries. Could you explain how Romania's grid advancements have supported the region's energy security goals, especially as more CEE countries work to phase out fossil fuels?
Thank you for the question. In the frame of our discussion, I think I have to define better what for us is CEE region, because for us it's a little bit different. It means from Romania to the west until comprising Austria, comprising east of Germany, and comprising Slovenia and Croatia. So regarding this perspective of electricity and the grids, transmission and distribution grids in Europe, I have to say that this is a common endeavor for grid developments, because there are some pillars of this. For increasing renewable energy integration, the main actions refers to first grid modernization. And Romania has invested in upgrading its transmission and distribution networks to accommodate the fluctuating nature of renewables energy sources, in the wind and solar especially. The interconnected development, so the countries throughout the region are striving to develop projects, and you know how difficult today is with the land permits and everything, to develop interconnections between countries. Our country has invested in building and upgrading interconnectors, and investing in the transmission distribution grids altogether. It's the paramount importance, and achieving the 70% trading availability is one of the main goals. On the list, I want to mention some concrete projects. We'll put in operation next week a new overhead line, 400 kV with Serbia. The second interconnection with Moldova, it's ongoing, and the works will start early next year. On the other hand, internal connects. Connects means critical network elements are on the site, and projects of multi-tens of millions of euros are under development. We have to see from a broader perspective the 10 years network development plan at the European level. It's a part of the needed program for strengthening of electrical networks. However, I have a comments here, and we have to be on the side of common sense. The renewable investment volume may lead to an avalanche of grid reinforcement and development. And I'm questioning more and more the coordination of the projects among European states and among each transmission system operator and distribution operators. Does it make sense? Are there other measures and policies to lead us to a desired result of integrating all possible renewable resources? This is a question to be answered, because we can invest multi-tens of billions of euros and still not to be enough. Regarding our support for CEE countries' energy transition in the electricity field, the secure and reliable operation of the interconnected European power system is our main focus. And this aims to ensure a fair and resilient coupled market for a real energy union. We are part of 4 capacity calculation regions and 1 central system operational region. And we are looking also for soft measures to reach the targets and to create operational and commercial working methodologies in order to mimic a copper plate power system as much as possible. Regarding legal measures we take in Romania, the Romanian Parliament has recently enacted the law of offshore wind. The law is now in force, and the new law is providing for a general framework for development of offshore wind in the Black Sea. For the Romanian market, resonating with the CEE needs, the most awaited support scheme of contract for difference has been enacted, and the first auction is being underway. By chance, I'm the president of the auction committee, so I know better. I have the insights of the whole action. As some of the projects in ready-to-build stage are actively seeking offtake arrangement, the local market has been entering slowly in long-term agreements, the PPA. I can, by implementing together with all the actors in Central, Southeast, Shadow South, I mean Balkan 6 countries, and East Europe, the network codes and the clean energy package legal requirements, a whole world of opportunity has opened to the market and integration of renewable in the system. And unfortunately, because I have to also to highlight that, there are important concerns regarding the adequacy of the region and phasing out of classical generation, because you have discussed a lot upon that. I mean, phasing out fossil included in an accelerated rhythm is still questionable. To tackle this, I mean, there are options to tackle this. We are developing in an accelerated pace the electric storage. For us, for Romania, the end of 2025, we have inside 1,250 megawatts of storage, electrical storage only in operation. One of the conclusions, in my professional opinion, is that the national position have to soften enough to admit that a more centralized system operation is beneficial for all. As CEE countries continue to phase out fossils, from my perspective, Romania well-developed grid infrastructure will remain essential in ensuring a reliable, sustainable, and secure energy future for the region. Regarding, because we have to put a finger on the problems, regarding the electricity flows throughout Central and East Europe, the main bottlenecks between and inside Austrian and Hungarian system are a real concern for us. And as we know, the internal electricity market can be fair and efficient only by ensuring enough commercial and physical flows between the bidding zones. So I hope I have replied enough to your question, but I'm waiting for other questions if necessary.
Thank you, George, for your input. I saw also Mikhail thinking, not out loud because you were muted, but would you like to comment on what George said?
I just would like to add on the possibility for action, because we probably have quite a lot of civil society representatives. So I think engaging with transmission system operators becomes even more important. Like, we are not at the stage when we are just raising awareness and like demanding the very basic political commitments. We are now in the middle of the transition, and I think like seeking the common ground between the climate-oriented stakeholders, activists, NGOs, and TSOs can be very beneficial for both sides. And I would say that in Poland, we had that dialogue even under previous administration, and is been improving now. And that can be a like very important partner to have the not just progressive, but also very grounded in technical reality scenarios, and quite commonly you can find, despite like their traditional instinct to be quite conservative, now we find that it's possible to find the more progressive approach in the TSO than among even politicians, who also quite commonly have like limited technical knowledge and technical understanding.
Thank you. Teresa and Bino, would you also like to comment on what George brought up? Not now.
Maybe I have a question for
Yeah.
George. George, you mentioned the need to coordinate more on project development. Could you expand a bit more on that, what that would look like?
Yes, I feel that 10 years network development plan at the European level is just an aggregation of national plans without a strong and needed coordination from the helicopter view. So if you know how this plan is built, each national TSO are simply throwing their own projects, and I have no feeling about the real coordination on the European level. It's more, it's even more on that. I can add that now you maybe know it's under development, under discussion to a political level about the cost sharing. The cost sharing for investment. I mean, this is all very linked to the offshore, but also for this issue, I think the national interests are prevailing to the greater good of at the European level. So I have the feeling somebody has to take the lead to say, okay, guys, you have to coordinate everything. I know for some it's more expensive than for others, but this has to be done by a certain moment in time.
Thank you, George. For the second round of discussion, maybe I would like to come back to also what Peter said. You also touched a little bit upon it in your inputs. So we heard from Peter that von der Leyen emphasizes the need to stay on course on all the goals laid out in the previous 5 years. But that also the key considerations such as competitiveness or access to raw materials and job creation and so on within the EU are increasingly interwoven with goals laid out in the Green Deal. And if we now have the next MFF coming up, the new priorities are a first indicator about which policy fields in the European Commission and the European Council will prioritize for its upcoming budgetary planning. And I think most maybe in June 2025, the MFF will be presented, or maybe later after the German elections. Therefore, it is now the time to sharpen the existing narratives and to ensure the strategic alignment of portfolios to position climate action and its importance on the EU level. So for the next question round, I would like to learn about how the next phase of the European Green Deal can support CEE countries in facilitating a just transition towards the 2030 climate targets, but as well new ambitions for 2040. So what strategies, mechanisms are essential and why? And how can we also leverage EU funding and collaborative efforts to address socioeconomic challenges? Teresa, I think your example of the green savings model is very interesting for our participants. And could you maybe elaborate on the specific role that the EU funding schemes played in its implementation? And to what extent do you think something similar could be replicated in other countries, also in the context of a new European financial framework?
Thank you, Elsa. Yes, so as I said, most of our budget is based on the modernization fund. It's not the only source, but it's the main one for the green savings programs we are now talking about. And as you definitely know, Czech Republic has a very fragmented settlement structure, which makes a bit difficult for some central role or central level to organize anything. Therefore, we use regional partners and stakeholders that are helping us to implement the policy, especially in the environment in this program. We are using local action groups. These are also implemented in other EU funds and cooperation with European Union. And then we use now for the environmental policy, energetical specialists. These are stakeholders who are paid by the Ministry of Industry and Trade. That's definitely, and they are helping and advising the people, the wide population, about what is needed to do and what is efficient to do. So it's really door-to-door policy from these stakeholders that they are doing for us. They visit each house that is interested to connect or to use up the support of the Green Saving Program and to discuss about the measures that can be done or that should be done, because we do allow them to coordinate more of the programs. It's not that you can use just one of the ways. You can coordinate them and you can use more of them. So basically, if you are, I will make it very easy. If you are a very poor family, you can use just one program for the poorest households. If this helps, and after several years you're better on, you can use another program which needs higher budget and makes greater efficient energy measure. So that's basically what do we need and what we are doing. And now the target is to nearly, I would say, destroy all the solid fuel boilers, which is a great problem of us. And what we do support mostly, it's the thermal insulation that helps a lot of the old buildings. And what the Czech people really like are the solar thermal and photovoltaic systems. So this is really a great boom now in the Czech Republic, and even the industrial companies has react very fast and strongly on it. And this is now very, very top in the Czech Republic for now.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I saw Mikhail and George reacting. Would you like to come in and comment on what Teresa suggested?
Yeah, I can very shortly address the issues of also the transition on the household level. In Poland, we have still millions of households that burn coal for heat. We are the last among the last like advanced countries that do that at this scale. And but we have also quite a success with the clean air program. That is approaching 1 million submitted like financing requests by households, and this will play a crucial role also in upcoming years when we are approaching implementation of ETS2, and also the social risks and narrative risks that can arise that, and of course the households that use coal for heat will be especially affected. So as civil society in Poland, but also in other countries, we have to very much look at the hands of the administration to see if the work on social climate fund implementation is ongoing, and that the funds will be spent according to the needs of the transition and social fairness, and not, for example, be affected too much by the political also incentives, yeah, that might, for example, encourage politicians to protect, I don't know, middle class car owners, yeah, against those new costs of emissions. So this is a very important subject also when we talk about the social approval of the transition.
Thank you.
I may add that we shouldn't play naive. I mean, we cannot you cannot electrify the heating throughout Europe in like 100%. We have to take into account the level of wealth, of affordability. I mean, for us, we are not using so much coal for sure for heating. We are in the rural side of Romania. We are using wood especially. And of course, I fully encourage the insulation of houses. For instance, in Bucharest, I can tell you, like 70 to 75% of the blocks, big blocks, you know, built in the communist times, are already have the insulation on them. But you cannot do that on the beautiful architectural palaces and houses. That would be so wrong to do it. But coming back, what Teresa said, electrification is one way, but it's not the way. I mean, we have to take into account that also the wood is renewable. So yeah, it's polluting, but we have to take into account that people cannot afford electrification. Sorry.
What do you think, Teresa? what George said.
No, thank you. No, you don't have to be sorry. It's not that we are mad in the Czech Republic about the photovoltaic systems. It's just it's the main part of it. We do support the gas boilers, even it's not very popular, and the pipelines as well. But the truth is that over the 30% of the systems is photovoltaics. That's real. It's not that I'm favorite for it or the government is favorite for it, but that's the reality now.
Thank you. George, you already made your argument quite clear now, the way you structured it. In case you have maybe to add on my bigger question, so what additional investments or regulatory adjustments do you believe are needed to accelerate the transition to renewable energy? Feel free to share, maybe also go into the EU mechanisms that have made the most important impact so far.
Yes, I tried to doing that. So in the investment domain, the grid infrastructure, I think continued investment in modernizing the grid to accommodate increasing renewables integration, including smart grid technologies and energy storage solution. But energy storage solution doesn't mean necessarily electric storage solution. There are a lot of technologies, so we cannot just focus on the electricity storage. Renewable energy projects, substantial investment in large solar and wind project, power project, as well as smaller scale distributed generation initiative. I mean, prosumers, yeah, let's encourage them. Direct current project in cables to increase dramatically the interconnections capacities are a good approach. This is my opinion, and may bring more capacity, easier to operate than classic AC interconnections. However, I consider internal DC lines in the national grids as being less efficient than the interconnection between bidding zone as such. And now I will tell you something I really think it's a way forward. The nuclear generation should be accepted and thus reconsidered in the frame of total decommissioning of stable baseload fossil generation. As strategies, I think clear policy framework, a stable and supportive policy framework with clear targets and incentives for renewable energy development. Another point of attention should be streamlining the permitting process, efficient and streamlined permitting procedures in order to expedite the development of renewables energy projects. International cooperation. Scrolling down some practical measures I can mention, but not limiting to cost-effective soft solution I mentioned already. In the field of operation that have to be taken into account to ensure the safe and efficient delivery of massive electric power needed in an electricity-dependent economy. The cost-sharing mechanism at the European level should be carefully designed in order to produce common welfare for all participants, not only for some big countries benefiting on it. Offshore projects in the most appropriate areas will leverage the generation in the times the resources are not available in other regions. And a very strong connectivity will bring something like stable baseload pattern of generation throughout Europe. Capacity calculation methodologies combined with a better day-ahead market coupling, intraday and long-term mechanisms will clearly add up benefits to investment measures mentioned above. I must confess, the market coupling actual philosophy is not the best one in Europe. And the electricity market design reform was only a patch trying to prove the viability of the model that was decided in the power domain during the early years of the second decade of our century. I really think a thorough institutional debate is more than welcome for a nodal model price approach like they have in the United States. Now, about regulatory adjustments, the market design. I just mentioned reform to the electricity market design to accommodate the increasing share of variable renewable energy, including capacity mechanisms and flexible market arrangement. The grid code modernization, I can tell you, the new demand response code now under approval at the ACER level is increasing the operational interwinding of transmission and distribution operators and would open a new area of EU grid operational level. I want to complete what Michal said. I see more and more the distribution operators' role increasing in the next future. On the other hand, we have to be aware of the balancing problem is the hottest one in the world of renewable generation and distributed generation. The amended balancing code, now under approval, and the fresh open mind for pan-European coordination is needed more than ever, even though national interest will remain an important hurdle to reach this. Regarding EU mechanism, EU funds, leveraging EU funds such as Recovery and Resilience Facility, Just Transition Fund, to finance renewable energy projects and support regional development. And I would like to add that the cost of global electricity-based economy should not be underestimated. So I presume largest economies, the European economies, will try to protect their own standard, and smaller ones will struggle to find national solution to cope with the challenges. So I will dare to throw the glove in by saying that the path towards a green electricity-based economy must be a common endeavor in Europe. Otherwise, I can tell you, competitors like China, India, United States, other emerging economies will prevail in harvesting the benefits of the industry research services for which Europe has been championing for many decades, and now it's renouncing to. This is the reason we have to be mindful of the rhythm of the changes and the measure as steps to go over the no regret moment as the entire bloc and not some European states. Instead of conclusions, by implementing these strategies and leveraging EU mechanisms, we can significantly accelerate the renewable energy transition and contribute to regional energy security. I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Very concise and completely. And I think a lot of us agree on this. This path towards energy security or renewables need to be a common one. As a German, I think I need to say that we do not consider promotion of nuclear energy as the right instrument for sustainable energy transition. For example, in Germany, the nuclear phase-out in 2023, was driven by the long-term safety risks, which became undeniable after the Fukushima disaster in 2011, as well as the challenges of nuclear waste management, which is huge. And I think the true long-term costs of nuclear energy are significantly higher than the costs of energy from renewable sources. And even during an acute energy crisis, Germany was able to transition to a more diverse energy mix while also decreasing dependence on a single source and increasing energy independence. And this obviously required a combination of measures. And of course, such a phase-out does not happen behind closed doors, but needs, in my view, well-informed, transparent public debate, which maybe also you, or I think we all should encourage decision makers in the CEE to participate in. And I think that this is quite absent around the region at the moment. And maybe we could also put this on the list, or maybe we agree to disagree, but I think that could be also a way forward. But I now would like to also give Binu and Michal the word. Binu, what strategies would you recommend to ensure continued collaboration between governments and businesses in the CEE, particularly in the coal-dependent regions that may face out socioeconomic challenges?
Okay, if I can indulge myself, there are maybe 4 things I wanted to discuss on these as opportunities I see. Just picking up on some of the stuff George was also saying around the joint planning that's needed for the system that we're building. I think one thing to keep in mind is that the nationally determined contributions, so the NDCs, revised NDCs, are due February 2025. And this is an opportunity for EU to set a global example on ambitious NDC that helps us deliver 1.5. And the EU obviously cannot do that without the support of all governments. So I think collaboration to get an ambitious plan in place that can deliver an ambitious NDC in time for the EU would be a really key thing to do. And maybe just something as a hopeful note on this one, the PPCA has actually started a call to action for no new coal, where we're encouraging governments to commit to building no new unabated coal power in their national plans and NDCs. And the European Commission is actually playing a leading role in this campaign and encouraging other countries to join. The Czech Republic actually recently signed on to this as well. So I'd say, there's that one opportunity to come around the NDCs, and a pretty urgent one at that. The other one, I'm a little bit more vague on, but Peter at the beginning talked a little bit about the opposition to some of these efforts that are obviously at play, and there's politics involved in that. But I think we're seeing in PPCA and many other regions as well, that we need to do a better job of advancing the narrative of the benefits of the transition. So collaborating between the different regions and the different CSOs that are present here also. A classic example is just transition. When we talk about just transition, it's always all about let's mitigate the negative impacts on jobs and let's make it less worse for people. But it's not just about that, right? There's enough studies out there saying that this is going to be a net positive benefit for people. So, how are we advancing that narrative with real solutions on how there can be benefits to affordability, to sustainable livelihoods, to local economic development? Communication of solutions for that and that narrative, I think, would be important. Third thing I want to build on, again, from something Peter mentioned, he was talking about how the conversation on the Just Transition Fund is still a live one. And I think, Mikhail, you also mentioned some of the financing challenges that are happening from a grid perspective, but those are also applicable for socioeconomic challenges and for just transition. And so, yes, the Just Transition Fund can play a role, but I think there's also a big role in collaborating to scale up successful innovation we're seeing on financial solutions. I want to share an example for that. The EBRD has invested 240 million PLN in bonds that were issued by the Polish utility Tauron. And in return, EBRD is expecting Tauron to mitigate the social costs of transition, to invest in just transition for their workers and in that local communities, as well as to invest in the grid in order to absorb the greater volume of renewable energy. So, some of the things that George was talking about. But, so there are mechanisms like this that are happening, and they need to be scaled up. There's also examples of private finance stepping in. And so what can we do to scale that up? And at the PPCA, we're actually supporting the work of the Coal Transition Commission. It came out of the Coal Transition Accelerator that the French launched at the last COP. And the idea behind this initiative is to help find ways to scale up finance solutions. And we work with governments, utilities, private finance, MDBs on that. And the last one, maybe this is a little bit trite. It's again about sharing lessons and practices. I know there's enough platforms out there that are starting to do this, but perhaps we can do a better job of also bringing higher level decision makers into these platforms. So it's not just technical people who are doing the implementation, but also those who hold the purse strings for the budgets and are making the political decisions, getting them involved in these solution dialogues. And we've done a series with the PPCA this year. And that's what I'd say one of the key lessons learned is getting the right people in the room. So those are my 4 things, I would say. The NDCs, getting clear on the narrative of the benefits of the transition, scaling up successful financial solutions, and then continuing to do sharing of lessons learned with decision makers.
Thank you very much, Binu. I saw a lot of nodding also among the other speakers on what you've mentioned. Mikhail, could you share also from your perspective what is necessary? And perhaps you give us an insight into your organization's work with the Polish mining group as a positive example on the ground. And if you also share how might this transition be affected or reflected by Poland's upcoming EU Council presidency, that would be great.
Yeah, so when we think about what do we have to do to actually phase out coal power plant one after another, we have to think about the system perspective and the power system readiness to have some alternatives. We have already discussed the issue quite a bit, so I won't dwell too much on that. I agree that there is no size fits all, and we have to accustom to local challenges and local circumstances. And this is also why it's important to have a strong local stakeholders, but also with strong analytical tools, because those challenges and constraints were used. I can speak about the example from my country. They were used to, for example, defend the interest of incumbent sectors against the alternatives. Yes, so it's not that those challenges are not there, but we have to really understand to what extent there are and think about cleaner alternatives. So to really like understand what is a true concern and what not really, and what can be solved, it's important to have also quite a lot of technical experience. But when it comes to the social side, and especially the Polish dimension of transition in the coal regions, as Instat, we are quite active on that. We have been advising the regions in preparation of territorial transition plans, and we are now working with quite a few of them. And unfortunately, still in Poland, we are more at this level of really raising the awareness and building consensus that the change is happening and will happen faster than it was previously stated. And unfortunately, on that front, new NECP is trying to somehow avoid the subject and a little bit to cover the fact that the faster expansion of clean power, which is great, will affect especially demand for coal in the power sector very quickly and in very significant way. So the first, and this is, I think, one of the most important advantages of just transition mechanisms, that actually they required the regions to prepare just transition plans, and they had to state what is the scenario and how it would affect them. So that was actually the opportunity for the local, regional stakeholders in administration, in NGOs, to really push and try to force the national government to really have like more realistic foresight and like more realistic policy in place. So this is still not finished process, but we see steps forward being done. And about the needs for upcoming years, I think we have to really like understand the challenges of each region. Quite often when we think about the transition in Poland, we are affected by the memories of very harsh transition after 1990, where really there was like a collapse of the many industrial cities with very like long-term consequences. Now we are speaking about transition in the country that has really low unemployment, even in those regions. For example, in Silesia region, when our hard coal mining is located. This is a huge urban center with quite a diversified modern economy. I'm actually usually more concerned about lignite centers. So like medium-sized cities with lignite mine and power plant, those are still much more reliant on this sector. But we are working on that. And the last thing I would like to say is it's not only about miners. Miners are usually not that numerous group. They are politically influential. They can achieve concessions, but we have to also think about their families, their neighbors, the towns where they live in, about the future, like the economic future for those towns at the time when like those medium-sized cities are struggling like everywhere. Yeah, like it's hard to find a country where there isn't a stronger development in the few like capital cities, and the countryside and especially smaller cities are quite often struggling with keeping, for example, young people there and to encourage them to really continue their future life in those places. So we are also talking with local stakeholders about using their economic advantages of really attracting the investment in a lot of industries. Also to use, for example, the power, the existing grid infrastructure to develop renewables or energy storage, which can also, even if it doesn't bring that much jobs, because it's like not the same business as a coal mine, but it can bring, for example, some income to the local governments, because those local governments are also quite often reliant on those tax incomes from mining and are quite well off at the moment, and that will gradually change. So to really like have an realistic vision of challenges, but also of opportunities. And at the moment, I think having the just transition mechanism in place would be good to like encourage this dialogue. Even if the money is not that important, it's like important to encourage those stakeholders to have this like platform for speaking about plans. And that was the added advantage last time. And speaking about the presidency, because there was like a government, the change of government, we are only now working on our national policy. I don't think that our ideas for the presidency are as fleshed out as I would like them to be at this point. We are also engaging in some bodies like consulatory bodies for NGOs. What I would like to see and what we are encouraging government to see is to really connect the issues of energy security, which is especially important for Eastern and Central Europe, with the transition, that those are absolutely not competing goals, that we have to lower our reliance on imported fossil fuels by going forward with the transition. And yeah, I hope our messaging will resonate inside the government.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. George, you have to leave us now, right? Or you have some time for questions?
Yeah, I can answer to your last question if you want, or I can comment what Bino said. In my opinion, really, we have to avoid because we have to have a broader image. We have to be on the upper level. We have to avoid overinvestment first, because this is very costly, and we have to take into account to tackle the cost of the transition related, as I told you, with the competitiveness of our economies. And I don't mean only the economies from East or Europe or Central Europe, for all the whole Europe, because you know very well, you're German affected as we speak about the auto vehicle industry collapse, electrical industry. We are not producing chips in Europe for computers. The steel industry has gone down. So we are on the crossroad now. So I mean, we have to be so wise to find a middle way in order to make a path of changes and transitions in order not to disturb our lives. And I mean not our lives here, but we are 520 million Europeans living here. So with the eye for the future, we have to take into account today life. So
thank you. Thank you, George. Maybe we can stay in contact later on. He has to run to another meeting. I still see no questions in the chat, apart from the one from the AI. That's okay. I mean, there was a lot of input, and I'm sure that you were carefully listening. If you have still some questions, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I would also like to give Peter the chance for a last comment on what you've just heard from our speakers.
Yeah, well, first of all, this was incredibly rich and useful. I've learned a lot, and I think that maybe I just want to pick up a couple of things that were said, which I didn't touch on, but I feel like are really important. I think one is this connection to the ETS2 pricing coming, and the link to the work, particularly Teresa, you were talking about in terms of replacing heating systems. That seems like a real high political priority. If we really need to make sure that there is more on offer by 2027 than just pay more, just pay the price and lump. I mean, people need to be given a choice and an option to move to a carbon-free heating system, and I think that's a really important one. I think a lot of the things George said are major political questions. I think all of them incredibly relevant. I would really agree with his sort of point about things being at a crossroads in Europe, and things can go different ways. The one thing I would really underline is that the other thing I would really underline is the governance question he's flagged up. I mean, European national authorities never like to give sovereignty to the EU unless they really, really have to. And I think the question really is, are we at a point now where they feel they really, really have to? And my guess is we may be. I mean, if you look at the debate that we're having on things like grids and other things, I think we're getting there. I mean, and it touches a bit also on the discussion on nuclear, and it's something the EU will never agree on, but the fact of the matter is that the EU has actually agreed on a lot of other things that give us a lot of has the work cut out for us, and I think that's where things like grids, interconnectors, and that question of, well, we can't continue with the model we have now where everyone just says, well, this is what we want to do, you go ahead and do it, and we'll see how it works. I mean, that is just not. But the governance system you're going to have to put in place there is going to require, governments then to say, okay, well, we'll accept the EU then to come back and say, well, sorry, you do it, you don't. That is the consequence, and I think that is something we're moving to. It's really important that we concentrate on that, and the question whether then that sort of final 10-15% of capacity is that gives us the long duration storage, whether that is met by things like abated gas or plants running on hydrogen or super hot rocks, geothermal, or hot rocks in a box, or nuclear, is a very interesting one. But at the same time, we still need a lot of effort on all those other things, and I think that's really the one thing I actually would disagree on is the whole historical houses issue, because if I remember correctly, Romania actually is one of the places where the first palace in Europe that electrified, that got electric lighting, is in Romania, and I think the point is that the only reason we have historical houses in Europe is because they've modernized over time. No one lives in a historical house the way we built them 400 years ago. So I'm pretty sure we're going to find a way to modernize these houses as well, to have the state-of-the-art renewable technologies linked to them as well. So yeah, I would. That's probably what I would leave it with. I think, yeah, again, really useful, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Peter, for these last words and comments. Please fill out my colleague just shared a little survey that would help us if you could just use that. I'd really like to extend a special thank you to all of our speakers, including Peter, for sharing their expertise and perspectives. So thank you very much. And a huge thank you also to our partners at E3G and CEE Bankwatch for making this web seminar possible. And of course, for all of you, to all of you for joining us today. As Peter said, it was a very rich and dense discussion. We will write a report and also, as I said in the beginning, upload the recording